It was a cold December evening when Michael sat on the damp sidewalk, his fingers numb as he clutched a tattered old coat around himself. The world had moved on without him, indifferent to his suffering. Once a man with dreams, a job, and a family, he had lost everything. Life had broken him, piece by piece, leaving him with nothing but the echoes of his past. But fate has a strange way of intertwining lives, even when all hope seems lost. And on that very evening, as the city bustled with people too busy to notice him, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. A face he never thought he'd see again. A face that carried the weight of love, loss, and an unborn child. Michael's life had not always been like this. There was a time when he had a stable job, a modest apartment, and a sense of purpose. He had been a kind man, always helping others, but fate had been cruel. It started with a job loss, followed by an eviction. Then came the downward spiral. His savings vanished, his friends disappeared, and the streets became his only refuge. He had learned to survive with whatever he could find, scraps of food from overflowing bins, the kindness of strangers when they spared some change, and the company of stray dogs who never judged him. But tonight, something felt different. As he sat in his usual spot near a coffee shop, watching the hurried footsteps of passers-by, he noticed her, a woman wrapped in a heavy coat, her hands resting gently over her belly. She moved slowly, her face tired, her eyes burdened with a sorrow that he recognized all too well. His heart stopped. It was Claire. Memories came flooding back in an instant. Claire, the woman who had once been his light in the darkest of times. He had known her when life still had meaning. She was the wife of his best friend, Daniel, a man who had always been more like a brother to him. But Daniel was gone. A tragic accident had taken his life, leaving Claire a widow, struggling to navigate a world that had suddenly become cruel and unforgiving. Michael had lost touch with her after Daniel's passing. He had wanted to be there for her, but life had swept him away like an unstoppable current. And now she was standing there, just a few feet away, unknowingly close to the man who had once sworn to protect her. A war raged inside him. Should he call out to her? Would she even recognize him? What if she turned away in disgust, ashamed of what he had become? Before he could decide, Claire suddenly stumbled. Michael acted without thinking. He pushed himself up from the ground, ignoring the stiffness in his legs, and rushed forward just in time to catch her before she could fall. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at him. For a moment, there was only silence. And then, recognition. Michael? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in that single word, there was disbelief, sorrow, and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. He swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. Claire, it's really you. She stared at him, taking in his appearance, the unkempt beard, the hollow eyes, the ragged clothes. He saw the sadness in her eyes deepen, not with judgment, but with something far more painful, pity. What happened to you? She asked, her voice shaking. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain years of suffering in just a few sentences? But then, Claire's expression softened. She reached out and gently placed a hand on his arm, ignoring the dirt, the cold. Come with me, she said. He hesitated. He had gotten used to people walking away, pretending he didn't exist. But Claire, she wasn't walking away. She was offering something he hadn't known in years, kindness. And so, with hesitant steps, he followed her. Claire led Michael to a small cafe just around the corner. The warmth inside was overwhelming, making him realize just how frozen he had been. She ordered him a hot meal without a second thought, sitting across from him as though they were simply old friends catching up. For the first time in years, he felt human again. As he took the first bite of warm soup, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the meal, but for this moment, for Claire. But as he looked at her, he noticed the sadness in her eyes, the weight she carried, not just in her body, but in her heart. "Claire," he said softly, "you're pregnant." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup in her hands. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "And I'm scared, Michael. I have no one left." Her words hit him like a dagger. He had thought he was the only one suffering, but here she was, grieving, alone, carrying a child without support. And in that moment, he made a silent promise. He may have lost everything, but he would not let Claire go through this alone. Fate had reunited them for a reason. Sometimes life takes everything from you, stripping you down to nothing but your memories and regrets. Michael knew this feeling well. He had lost his home, his dignity, and his purpose. But on that cold evening, something changed. Claire, his best friend's widow, had found him, not as the man he used to be, but as a broken version of himself. Yet, instead of looking away, she had reached out. Now, as he sat across from her in a small cafe, warming his frozen hands on a cup of coffee, he realized something. Maybe, just maybe, fate had given him a second chance. Michael hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. The steam from his coffee rose into the air, mixing with the soft hum of the cafe. The world outside was still harsh, but in here, for the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Claire watched him closely, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. She hadn't asked about his past yet, and he wasn't sure he was ready to explain it. Instead, he focused on her. "You said you're scared," he said gently. "Why?" She let out a shaky breath, staring down at her cup. "Because I don't know how to do this alone, Michael. Losing Daniel broke me, and now I'm about to bring a child into this world and I have no one." Her voice cracked on the last word, and something inside Michael clenched. "You're not alone," he said before he could stop himself. Claire's eyes met his, searching for something. Perhaps reassurance, perhaps hope. A bitter smile crossed her lips. "But I am, Michael. My family lives states away, and Daniel's parents, they blamed me for his death. I lost everything when I lost him." Michael felt that pain. He knew it intimately. "I know what it's like to lose everything," he admitted. "But Claire, you don't have to go through this alone. Let me help you." She hesitated. "Michael, you have your own struggles." He nodded. "I do. But helping you, it gives me a reason to fight again." Silence hung between them, heavy yet filled with something neither of them could quite name. Then, Claire reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She pushed it toward him. "What's this?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. A way to start over. Inside the envelope was a key. "To what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire hesitated, then said, "A place to stay." Michael froze. "Claire, I can't—" "You can," she interrupted. "And you will." He wanted to protest, but deep down he knew this wasn't just charity. This was something else. This was her way of saving both of them. Claire's apartment was small, but to Michael it might as well have been a palace. The moment he stepped inside, he felt a strange sensation, something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. The first night was the hardest. The bed was too soft after years of concrete sidewalks. The silence of the apartment was unsettling after the constant noise of the streets. But as he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he reminded himself, this was a second chance. The next few days blurred together. Claire went to work, and Michael stayed behind, determined to make himself useful. He cleaned, he fixed things, he even started cooking simple meals. For the first time in years, he had a routine. And Claire seemed lighter. One evening, as she sat on the couch, rubbing her belly, she looked at him with something he hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. Gratitude. "You don't have to do all this, you know," she said softly. Michael shrugged. I want to. She smiled. Daniel would be proud of you. His throat tightened. He had let Daniel down before. But maybe, just maybe, he could make things right. One afternoon, Claire returned home with an envelope in her hand. She sat across from Michael and placed it on the table. I found something, she said. Michael raised an eyebrow. What is it? She hesitated. A job opportunity. Michael's heart pounded. A friend of mine runs a small bookstore. She needs help. I thought, maybe you'd be interested. He stared at the envelope, fear and hope warring inside him. Claire, I don't even know if I remember how to work a normal job, he admitted. She smiled softly. Then we'll figure it out together. Michael took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe. Believe that he wasn't beyond saving. Believe that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life. With Claire's help, he was ready to try. Hope is a fragile thing. For years, Michael had lived without it, believing his life had no purpose beyond surviving another day on the streets. But then, Claire had reappeared, pregnant, grieving, but still standing. And in her, he found a reason to fight again. Now, with a roof over his head and an opportunity for work, Michael was beginning to see the faintest glimmer of a future. But starting over wasn't easy. The weight of the past still clung to him, whispering that he wasn't worthy of a second chance. The question remained, could he truly rebuild his life, or was he too broken to be saved? Michael's first day at the bookstore was terrifying. He stood outside the small shop, hands shaking, staring at the faded wooden sign above the door. It had been years since he had been part of the working world. What if he failed? What if he embarrassed Claire? But then he heard her voice. You've got this. He turned to find her standing beside him, a reassuring smile on her lips. She squeezed his hand briefly before stepping back. Go inside. I'll be here when you're done. Michael swallowed hard and pushed open the door. The bookstore smelled like paper and old memories. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stacked with forgotten stories waiting for new hands to hold them. A woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, greeted him warmly. You must be Michael, she said. Claire told me about you. He tensed, waiting for judgment. But there was none. I'm Margaret, she continued. I could use some help around here. Stocking shelves, organizing inventory, helping customers. Think you can handle it? Michael hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I'll do my best. Margaret smiled. That's all I ask. And just like that, he had a job. The first few weeks were difficult. Michael struggled with small things, remembering book categories, using the register, talking to customers without feeling like an outsider. But Margaret was patient, and slowly he started to regain confidence. One afternoon, a little girl walked into the shop with her mother. She wandered over to a shelf and picked up a book, her small fingers tracing the cover. Michael knelt beside her. That's a good one, he said. The girl looked up, curiosity in her bright eyes. Have you read it? He hesitated. Not this one, but I used to love books when I was younger. She smiled. Then you should read it too. Something in Michael's chest tightened. He had forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone so simply. Maybe he belonged here after all. That evening, as he locked up the shop, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense of pride. He had worked a full day. He had earned his pay. And when he stepped outside, Claire was waiting for him, just like she had promised. How was it? She asked. He exhaled. It was good. And for the first time in years, he meant it. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly began to take shape again. Michael became a part of Claire's world in ways he hadn't expected. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, helped prepare the nursery, and even attended a parenting class with her. One evening, as they sat on the couch, she suddenly said, "Michael, I want you there when the baby is born." He froze. "Claire, I mean it," she interrupted. "You've been with me through everything. I can't imagine doing this without you." His heart pounded. He wasn't family, he wasn't Daniel. But when he looked into Claire's eyes, he saw something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in. Acceptance. "I'd be honored," he whispered. And with those words, something shifted. He wasn't just rebuilding his life, he was building a new kind of family. The night Claire went into labor, Michael was by her side. He held her hand through the pain, whispered encouragement when she wanted to give up, and stayed when fear threatened to consume her. And then, in the early hours of the morning, a cry filled the room. A baby boy. Claire sobbed as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms. Michael stood frozen, watching as she cradled the newborn against her chest. Then, she looked up at him. "Michael," she whispered. "Meet Daniel." His breath caught. She had named him after his father, after the best friend they had both lost. Tears filled Michael's eyes. He reached out, hesitant. But Claire took his hand and placed it gently on the baby's tiny fingers. In that moment, everything changed. He had spent years believing he was beyond saving, that he had lost everything. But now, as he looked at Claire and baby Daniel, he realized something. He had been found. Michael was no longer the homeless man on the streets. He was a friend, a protector, a man with purpose. And as he stood in that hospital room, with Claire beside him and baby Daniel in her arms, he knew this was only the beginning of a brand new life. A life where love, second chances, and family weren't just dreams. They were real, and he would never let go of them again.